Hello folks, so in this video I'm going to be exploring two photographs, and those are photographs from Southam from his photo book and series Red River, and a photograph by the American photographer Todd Hido from his book and body of work A Road Divided. Now first off, if you don't know the work of Southam, then I'd highly recommend you check out his work after this video, because his catalogue of work finds itself as a fundamental cornerstone in British landscape photography. And I'd even go as far to say, in my opinion, that he's the greatest British landscape photographer working at the moment. Today we are specifically looking at this photograph here from his body of work that gravitates around a river in Cornwall. This is the Red River. Now, to give this photograph some personal and historical context, we first need to look back at Southam's earlier years. Born in Bristol in 1950, he left college in 1972 and moved back to Bristol. He didn't know any photographers, but ended up setting up a small gallery with a friend called Photographers Above the Rainbow. One day, a young English chap turned up. It was none other than the photographer Paul Graham. In Southam's appearance on Frame's podcast, he is stated as saying that Graham would keep buying all these incredibly expensive contemporary American colour photography books. This was Southam's first exposure to the new topographics movement, a movement concerned with photographing the relation of structures to the landscape, and in turn often carrying a societal, social and political commentary, which is only further highlighted as the photographs age. Southam says, "I was working in black and white. I immediately switched to colour," and this was after his exposure to this movement. With Southam's newfound interest, he travelled to Cornwall, wandering across the once industry-sodden plains of tin mine country, finally coming across a stained clay-rich river. Following this river, he slowly began building up a body of work that would cement his style, one he has stated as calling the visual survey, in which he meticulously focuses on a part of the landscape and documents it. And in the context of this body of work, I find this very clear. Now we have some context as to the way Southam works, I'd like to introduce the concept of the photographic document and its historical context. Historically, and quite bluntly, we see an evolution of photography as this. Niepce takes the first photograph, 1826, using a sheet of pewter coated with bitumen. The exposure time was around 8 seconds. Then Daguerre, a painter, partnered with Niepce and continued to refine the process using silver-plated metal sheets and mercury vapour, vastly reducing the exposure time by 1839 to a few seconds. This was an essential leap, as it allowed for the commercialisation of photography. It also allowed for the outside world to be captured in second fragments, something I'd argue as essential for capturing a document. Other key moments include William Henry Fox Talbot's discovery of the calotype, a few years after, which introduced the photographic negative, which allowed for multiple prints to be made from it, and also Frederick Scott Archer's introduction of the collodion wet plate process in 1851. Now, I see photographic documents as this: a photograph that can be observed as recording the world as it is. In David Bates' photography, The Key Concepts, he states, "Neither art nor advertising, documentary drew on the idea of information as a creative education about actuality, life itself. Documentary aimed to show in an informal way the everyday lives of ordinary people to other ordinary people." Now, if we deconstruct what he says, it boils down to one simple thing. The photographic document aimed to depict the world as it is, in all its ordinary splendour, for the eyes of the many to ingest as certain truth. Now, I've got my analysing hat on here. Barber. Probably best as we are heading to the furthest western stretches of the English country. Here we see what we recognise as two tin mines. This immediately gives us a certain truth. This photograph was taken in Cornwall without any previous introduction by text. We can already pin this photograph to a location. The soft muddy tones of the evening settling upon the foreground become diffuse and lightened by the vast misty expanse of the weald beyond. The photograph is composed in a precise way, almost with mathematical precision, forcing the world to submit to the geometric potential of 4 frame lines, something I see often in the new topographics movement. If we compare this to the work of Stephen Shaw, an American photographer, he too finds ways to fit the world neatly inside his ground glass, strictly abiding by rules of composition, such as the rule of thirds, which he seems to have recently deviated from with his drone photographs. But this photograph from Southam neatly frames the world before him into the age-old ideal of the compositional and aesthetic qualities of the picturesque. Yes, it submits to rules that aren't always present in real life. Does this take away from its agency as a document? I don't believe so. The world has aesthetic quality, and that deserves to be shown, and for the lack of a better word, documented. It feels like a big step away from other documents, such as Walker Evans' photographs of rural America for the FSA, in his joint publication, Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, or even Robert Adams' meditations on the American landscape in his works such as From the Missouri West. Both of these are very different. They subscribe to a particular visual language that is being used to frame the world in a certain way, to communicate something back to the viewer, and I believe this is what Southam is doing with this photograph. Now I want to introduce another photograph into the mix. This is a photograph by American photographer Todd Hido. Hido's work is often associated with his night scenes of suburban American houses soaked in mist and atmosphere. But I want to look at some of his lesser known work. A photograph taken in the daytime from his series and photo book, A Road Divided. To give this photograph some rough context, Hido, in a recent interview with photographer Willem Verbeek, is stated as saying, "Photography has the ability to tell the truth, but also to be fictitious. Memories are sometimes sharp and sometimes fuzzy." He goes on to say that he will take photographs through his car window in the daytime to depict a kind of internal atmosphere. He goes on to say in an interview with photographer Eric Kim, "1 minute, cold, crisp and conceptual German photography is the bee's knees. And then the next minute, emotional documentary work is hot. When I started my career, it was very much the era of theory and postmodernism. It was a cliché to have anything to do with that. I was encouraged to shoot from a uniform distance, to use a more neutral colour palette, to work more conceptually, and take a more objective stance, basically to work like I had worked with the Beckers in Dusseldorf." Now, taking what we have just discussed on the photographic document, and then next Todd Hido's practice, would you say that Todd's work leans more into the realm of fiction or document? For me, this is a tough one, but also quite plain. I feel like on the surface level, the way we read his photograph and the way it is intended to be read is as a fictitious rendering of the landscape before him to communicate emotional ideas, beauty, and peppered with a fierce invitation to allow the photograph to make you feel rather than tell. And this is why I love Hido's work. His work shatters the postmodernist ideas of his early career and invites us to externalise our psyches. And although this photograph is a fictitious rendering of the outside world, I believe that Hido's work uses this to create photographic documents of our internal landscape. On the other hand, this is how the world looked through his car window in that moment. This is a document of that, in reality, and it could be read as such. Now, how do the two photographs we discussed compare? I'd like to first look at the photograph by Edward J. Steichen titled The Flatiron, taken in 1904, and then printed in 1909. Looking at this photograph, we see a dark, misty city dotted with constellations of street lamps. An ominous building we can only assume is the Flatiron looms over the photograph in the distance. The photograph feels dank, sodden and dim. This pictorialist visage, far removed from the hushed pastel aesthetics of Hido's photograph, carries, however, a similar visual syntax. The overall mood is almost an antithesis, but the abstraction of the title of document remains. Pictorialism traded its rights to be a document for artistic expression, and I see Hido's photograph as almost neo-pictorialist for this reason. I can even see this neo-pictorialist categorisation seeping into the photograph by Southam. It's got misty atmosphere, far-off lights and soft focus, even though it is intended as a document. In conclusion, I feel as if both of these photographs sit on the blurred borders of document and fiction, with Southam's leaning further into document, calling outward over the boundary to Hido's lurking in the realm of fiction. I'll leave you with a quote that I recently read in Stephen Bull's A Companion to Photography from Solomon Hido. Reality is thus no more able to be located in the world than authenticity can be located in the author.